They've been surrounded, cornered, cut off from the world they once knew. But instead of surrendering, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are doing something no one expected. They're not just surviving the pressure. They're building something that could break the entire system. France thought expelling their troops would be the end. Russia and China saw an opening. And now, 3 military leaders are rewriting the rules of power in Africa. But here's what nobody's telling you. If this works, the shockwave won't stop at the Sahel. It'll reach every capital that ever drew a colonial border. The question isn't whether they'll resist. It's whether the world will let them win. The map is tightening. Across the Sahel, from the borders of Burkina Faso to the edges of Mali and Niger, a quiet web of military installations, intelligence hubs, and foreign operatives is being woven into place. France and its Western allies aren't staging an invasion. They're doing something far more calculated, building a strategic cage around 3 nations that dared to break free. This is encirclement, and it's happening right now. For decades, Paris maintained its grip on Francophone Africa through presence, not permission. Military bases in Chad, Côte d'Ivoire, and Senegal weren't just about counterterrorism. They were anchors of influence, ensuring that every political shift, every coup, every mineral contract passed through French approval. But then the ground shifted. Between 2020 and 2023, military juntas took power in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. One by one, they asked French forces to leave. One by one, Paris complied, but not quietly. The withdrawal wasn't surrender. It was repositioning. Today, Western powers are fortifying a ring of footholds just beyond the borders of the Alliance of Sahel states. Benin is hosting new training centers. Côte d'Ivoire has deepened defense ties with France. Ghana and Togo are exploring expanded security partnerships. Even Senegal, once seen as a stable partner, is being courted more aggressively. These aren't random decisions. They form a constellation of access points, surveillance capabilities, and rapid deployment options designed to monitor, contain, and if necessary, destabilize the newly defiant core of the Sahel. This isn't just about troops on the ground. The encirclement is layered. Intelligence sharing agreements allow Western agencies to track movements, communications, and supply lines across borders. Economic pressure is applied through frozen assets, withheld development aid, and exclusion from international financial mechanisms. Political isolation follows, with diplomatic campaigns framing the Sahel juntas as illegitimate, unstable, and unworthy of recognition. The message is clear. Independence has a cost. What makes this strategy so effective is its deniability. There are no declarations of war, no overt invasions. Instead, it's framed as security cooperation, counter-terrorism support, and regional stabilization. But the intent is unmistakable. By surrounding Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger with compliant neighbors hosting foreign bases, Western powers ensure that any shift toward full sovereignty is met with pressure from all sides. The Sahel states can expel foreign troops from their own territory, but they can't stop those same forces from operating just across the border. And the juntas know it. This is why the Alliance of Sahel States was formed. This is why they're exploring defense partnerships with Russia, deepening ties with China, and pushing for greater integration among themselves. They understand that isolation is the first step toward collapse. If they can't break the ring, they'll be forced to negotiate from a position of weakness, or worse, face internal destabilization orchestrated from the periphery. But here's where the stakes become even sharper. The Sahel isn't just about regional influence anymore. It's a testing ground for a broader geopolitical question. Can former colonies fully decouple from their former rulers, or will they always be hemmed in by those who once controlled them? If France and its allies succeed in containing the Sahel's independence movement, it sends a message to every other region contemplating a similar path. If they fail, it proves that the old playbook no longer works. Right now, the noose is tightening. Military encirclement is in place. Economic pressure is mounting. Political isolation is deepening. The question isn't whether the Sahel states will face consequences for their defiance. They already are. The question is whether they can endure long enough to forge a new path, or whether the weight of Western strategy will force them back into the old order. What happens next won't just shape the Sahel. It will define the future of sovereignty across Africa. They've drawn the line. Across the Sahel, from Ouagadougou to Bamako to Niamey, a new posture is taking shape. French military bases are being shuttered. Foreign troops are being escorted to the exit. Natural resource contracts are being reviewed, renegotiated, or outright canceled. This isn't negotiation. This is sovereignty being seized back, and the world is watching to see if it holds. For over 6 decades, the relationship between France and its former colonies in the Sahel operated on a familiar script. Paris provided security, or at least the appearance of it. In return, African governments aligned their foreign policy, currency, and resource extraction with French interests. It was a system built on dependency, sustained by military presence, and justified under the banner of partnership. But that arrangement has collapsed. The juntas that took power in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger didn't just reject French troops. They rejected the entire framework. The first signal came with the expulsions. Mali told French forces to leave in 2022. Burkina Faso followed in 2023. Niger, after its July 2023 coup, gave the final order. These weren't symbolic gestures. They were operational decisions backed by new security strategies. Instead of relying on foreign counter-terrorism missions that never seemed to end the terrorism, the Sahel states began investing in their own militaries. Recruitment increased. Training intensified. Equipment was sourced from non-Western suppliers, particularly Russia. The message was clear. If security is the justification for foreign presence, then we'll secure ourselves. But sovereignty isn't just about who holds the guns. It's about who controls the wealth. Across the region, governments are revisiting the terms under which their gold, uranium, and other critical minerals leave the ground. In Niger, the uranium that powers French nuclear reactors has been extracted under contracts negotiated decades ago, often under regimes more sympathetic to Paris. The current leadership is asking why a country rich in resources remains one of the poorest on earth. In Burkina Faso, artisanal gold mining, long dominated by foreign intermediaries, is being brought under state oversight. The goal isn't isolation, it's fairness. And that shift threatens billions in established revenue streams. This is where the stakes become undeniable. The Sahel's assertion of sovereignty isn't happening in a vacuum. It's occurring in a global environment where former colonial powers are being challenged across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. France's influence in Francophone Africa has been a pillar of its global standing, its seat on the UN Security Council, and its economic model. Losing control over the Sahel doesn't just weaken Paris regionally. It weakens its claim to be a global power. And France knows it. So do the juntas. That's why they've moved beyond individual defiance and formalized their cooperation. The Alliance of Sahel States isn't just a diplomatic forum. It's a defense pact, an economic bloc, and a political statement. By pooling resources, coordinating border security, and presenting a unified front, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are attempting to do what few post-colonial African states have managed: genuine independence without external permission. But independence has enemies. Western capitals are framing the Sahel juntas as authoritarian, unstable, and aligned with malign actors. Sanctions are being considered. Diplomatic recognition is being withheld. Regional organizations like ECOWAS, long seen as influenced by France, have suspended the three nations. The pressure is designed to isolate, delegitimize, and eventually force a return to the old order. Whether it works depends on whether the Sahel can sustain its current path economically and militarily. And that's the test. Sovereignty declared is one thing. Sovereignty maintained is another. The Sahel states have expelled foreign forces, but the terrorism those forces claim to fight hasn't disappeared. They've renegotiated resource deals, but they still need investment and infrastructure. They've formed an alliance, but they're surrounded by neighbors hosting the very powers they've rejected. The question isn't whether they want independence. It's whether they can defend it. What happens next will be studied for generations. If the Sahel succeeds, it proves that breaking free from neo-colonial structures is possible, even under immense pressure. If it fails, it becomes a cautionary tale about the cost of defiance. Either way, the line has been drawn, and there's no going back. Russia and China are in. Western capitals are out. Across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, a geopolitical realignment is unfolding that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Russian military instructors are training local forces. Chinese infrastructure firms are building roads, bridges, and telecom networks. The Sahel isn't just rejecting French influence. It's replacing it, and the implications stretch far beyond Africa. This shift didn't happen overnight. For years, the Sahel states operated within a Western-dominated system. French troops provided security. European aid funded development. The World Bank and IMF dictated economic policy. But the results were hard to ignore. Despite billions in foreign assistance and thousands of foreign soldiers, insecurity worsened. Terrorism spread. Poverty deepened. And the wealth extracted from Sahel soil, particularly uranium and gold, flowed outward while the people remained among the poorest on the planet. When the juntas came to power, they asked a simple question. If this system isn't working for us, why are we bound to it? The answer they arrived at was clear. They weren't. And so they began looking elsewhere. Russia was the first major non-Western power to respond. Wagner Group contractors, later reorganized under the Russian Ministry of Defense as Africa Corps, arrived in Mali in late 2021. Their role wasn't just combat. It was training, intelligence sharing, and equipment supply. By 2023, similar arrangements were in place in Burkina Faso and Niger. Moscow offered something the West wouldn't. No lectures about democracy, no conditions about governance, and no insistence on maintaining the old economic order. Just weapons, training, and a willingness to work with whoever held power. China took a different approach, but the outcome was the same. Beijing isn't sending troops. It's sending investment. Roads that connect landlocked Sahel nations to ports. Power plants that reduce energy deficits. Telecommunications infrastructure that modernizes connectivity. These aren't charity projects. They're strategic investments designed to secure access to critical minerals, expand China's belt and road footprint, and position Beijing as the partner of choice for African nations seeking alternatives to Western dependency. And unlike Western aid, which often comes with political strings, Chinese investment is transactional. You get infrastructure. We get access. No regime change required. This is where the power dynamics become unavoidable. For decades, France and its allies maintained influence in Africa not just through military presence, but through monopolizing the alternatives. If you wanted security assistance, you went to Paris or Washington. If you needed infrastructure funding, you went to the World Bank or European development banks. If you wanted diplomatic backing, you aligned with the West. But that monopoly is breaking. Russia and China have demonstrated that there are other patrons, other models, and other paths to development. And once that realization takes hold, the entire post-colonial framework begins to fracture. Western powers are acutely aware of this. That's why the rhetoric has shifted. The Sahel juntas are now described not just as authoritarian, but as proxies of foreign adversaries. Russian and Chinese engagement is framed as predatory, exploitative, and destabilizing. Sanctions are being discussed. Diplomatic isolation is being pursued. The goal is to make the cost of non-Western alignment so high that other African nations think twice before following the Sahel's lead. But the strategy has a flaw. It assumes that the status quo was working, and that fear of isolation will bring the Sahel back into the fold. Neither assumption holds. What's unfolding in the Sahel is a test case for a larger global shift. Can former colonies successfully diversify their partnerships and escape single power dependency? Can Russia and China provide sustainable alternatives to Western security and development models? And perhaps most critically, can the West adapt to a multipolar Africa, or will it continue trying to reassert a dominance that is rapidly slipping away? The Sahel has made its choice. It's betting that sovereignty, even with new partners, is better than dependency on old ones. Whether that bet pays off will determine not just the future of three nations, but the trajectory of African geopolitics for decades to come. And every capital from Paris to Washington to Moscow is watching the outcome. Three leaders, three nations, one defiant vision that could reshape an entire continent. Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, General Abdourahmane Tani in Niger, Colonel Assimi Goïta in Mali. They didn't inherit power through elections or dynasties. They seized it through coups. And now, surrounded by external pressure and internal chaos, they're attempting something that has eluded Africa for generations, building sovereignty from the ground up without permission and without apology. This isn't just about resisting France or rejecting Western influence. It's deeper. The narrative being constructed across the Sahel in speeches, state media, and military addresses frames the current moment as a civilizational struggle, a test of whether African nations can govern themselves, secure themselves, and prosper themselves without the structures imposed by former colonizers. The language is deliberate. National pride, self-reliance, regional unity. These aren't empty slogans. They're the ideological foundation of a project that, if it succeeds, could inspire similar movements from Senegal to Zimbabwe. Traoré has been particularly vocal. Since taking power in Burkina Faso in September 2022, he's positioned himself not just as a military leader, but as a symbol of generational defiance. Young, charismatic, and unapologetically Pan-African in rhetoric, he speaks directly to a continent tired of being dictated to. His speeches invoke Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader from the 1980s, who championed self-sufficiency and rejected foreign debt. The parallel isn't accidental. Sankara was assassinated in 1987, allegedly with French complicity. Traoré's invocation of his legacy is both a political statement and a warning. The fight for sovereignty has always been dangerous, but it's never been optional. Goïta in Mali and Tani in Niger have adopted similar postures, though with different styles. Goïta, who first took power in 2020 and consolidated control in 2021, has focused on military modernization and dismantling the remnants of French institutional influence. Tani, who leads Niger's junta after the July 2023 coup, has emphasized resource sovereignty, particularly uranium, which France has extracted for decades under terms many Nigerians view as exploitative. Together, the three leaders have formalized their cooperation through the Alliance of Sahel States, a confederation designed to pool military resources, coordinate economic policy, and present a united front against external pressure. But resilience isn't just rhetoric. It's operational. The Sahel states are fortifying borders, not just against jihadist incursions, but against the kind of proxy destabilization that has toppled governments across Africa. They're investing in local arms production, reducing dependence on foreign suppliers. They're renegotiating mining contracts, ensuring that more revenue stays within national budgets. They're building regional supply chains so that trade between Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey doesn't require approval from Paris or Brussels. These are structural moves designed to make sovereignty durable, not symbolic. And this is where the continental significance becomes unavoidable. If the Sahel succeeds, it proves that breaking with the old order is possible. It demonstrates that African nations can expel foreign troops, renegotiate unfair contracts, and build functional states without Western oversight. That narrative would resonate across a continent where younger populations increasingly question why independence in the 1960s didn't lead to true autonomy. But if the Sahel collapses into chaos, economic collapse, or civil war, it becomes a warning. It reinforces the argument that African nations need external guidance, that sovereignty without Western partnership leads to instability, and that defiance comes at too high a cost. Western capitals understand this dynamic. That's why the pressure is so intense. That's why sanctions are being considered. That's why regional organizations like ECOWAS, long influenced by France, suspended all three nations. The goal isn't just to contain the Sahel, it's to prevent the idea from spreading. Because ideas, once proven viable, are far more dangerous than armies. Right now, the Sahel is both battlefield and laboratory, a place where the limits of post-colonial sovereignty are being tested in real time. Traore, Tani, and Goïta didn't choose an easy path. They chose the only path they believed was left. Whether it leads to a new model of African independence or collapses under its own contradictions will determine more than the fate of three nations. It will define what's possible across an entire continent. And that's why every move, every alliance, every decision matters far beyond the Sahel's borders.